for spirituality in their weekly routines. Maybe meditation, yoga, prayer, reflection. Many of them also practice retreats where they are just quiet, and they try to find that inner voice.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen.
Good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest. And we are here in New York live. Actually, we're not on Zoom. Yeah, she will introduce herself. Josephine, please go ahead.
Yeah, so it's a great honor to be part of the podcast today. My name is Josephine. I'm originally Swedish, but I grew up as a child and teenager in Africa. Started actually following my parents to the north of Sweden, where they studied tropical medicine as medical missionaries, and then followed them through Belgium, Brussels, where they studied French, continuing to Nairobi in Kenya, where they studied the Kiswahili language, following through them to Rwanda, where they were awaiting work permits for Democratic Republic of Congo, and eventually ending up in the rural areas of Democratic Republic of Congo. And now we are talking 1980s, when Mobutu was dictator in that country. So I really grew up in a very adventurous way. So a little bit more about myself. I'm the global CEO of a Swedish faith-based foundation called LM International. We have been existing and working since 1958. Originally, we started working in the field of health in a hospital in South Africa, White River, and then we expanded extensively to other countries and continents, and we were a pioneer when it comes to literacy work, also with indigenous groups in Latin America, among other continents, and always with a focus on the most marginalized and women and youth. And later we also expanded into, in the end of the 1980s, 90s, WASH, water and sanitation. And our latest area of work is within food security and livelihood. So today we are a foundation that we do a great scope of work, but we have always kept our vision, dignified life, sustainable world, and our mission to save life and empower people. Maybe another thing I could mention just briefly is that I also have a researcher background. So I have a doctorate in theology and human rights from Uppsala University, which is one of the oldest, they have the oldest faculty of theology, if you look globally. And this has really marked my sense of combining legacy and tradition with transformational future thinking.
And it's a fascinating organization. And we talked a little bit about your organization when we were together in Brasilia during the G20 Interfaith Forum. But before we go there, I would like to go back to your childhood. So, I've met in my life a lot of, what are called PKs, preacher's kids. So, how did that inform your choices, in terms of where you would live or where you would, which direction you would work? Did you have you said, oh, that's not something that I want to do. I've seen this from my parents, so I go away. Tell a bit about, when you were living in the Congo or countries like that. And then ultimately, why did you study? Why did you choose the study that you're in now in the field?
So what I experienced as a child is really to live in a sort of community-centered context. My parents were always focusing on relationship building. Even though they worked professionally within the field of health as gynecologist and midwife, they always had the focus on this holistic approach to community building. And ever since I was a child and teenager, I kept that. I kept my focus on relationships. And that is actually what led me to theology as an academic domain and topic. It's really to understand how values and the drivers and motivators we carry within us, how it relates to doctrine, dogma, and morality and ethical frameworks, and how there is a constant inner negotiation in all of us, how we can live more truly to our ideals and our wishes. But we get lots of disruptions from media discourses, from expectations around us, from the global political economy. And we tend as humans to compromise. So we have our ideals, could be drawn from holy scriptures or different kinds of philosophical or human rights frameworks. But then we tend to compromise. And what has always been motivating me is to see what is there behind on the inside. And that's why I continuously have kept my link to faith actors, communities, and I'm quite proud to follow in my parents' footstep.
And that's fascinating, and thanks for sharing that. Was there, if you look back, was this part of a process where you had more realization, or was there a pivotal moment in terms of, oh, I remember that this happened, and that's why I'm doing what I do today?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's been a journey, like a life journey. You kind of grow constantly. But then I also had this moment because when I entered university, I wanted to expose myself. I wanted to be challenged. So I study psychology, peace and conflict studies, global political economy, anthropology, all of this broad scope of social and political science. And it came to a moment where I really started to ask some critical questions. How come we are not touching on the key aspects and topics of human life? And this is what today I find a lot has been captured in the Inner Development Goal framework, which is a framework that attracts me a lot today. And it came to a moment where I said, okay, I want to really go a bit deeper. I want to look at fragmentation, divisions, political discourses, and go a bit deeper and look at the root causes, look at drivers and inner tensions. And there is also where I started to value my personal faith, to invest time in, to also grow my inner spiritual life. So for me, my academic revelations came as a parallel process to the sort of longing in me to grow stronger on the inside than on the outside.
And was that something that happened during? I understand that it's a part of a process. But where it was maybe more conscious, was that during puberty, during your study, or later in your work? And when did you find then? Were you able to find an organization where you could be and where you could really be your whole self? Is that this last organization? Did that happen already before?
So it really was when I came out as a graduate with a master in global studies and global political economy. And I was placed to do work for ACT Alliance, Church of Sweden in Eastern Africa, both humanitarian aid and development cooperation and peace building. And I sort of realized that very little of the concept and theories that are taught are actually relevant. Because so much more in the societies where I worked in Eastern Africa, so many more concepts were integrated and not segregated, like you can see in a lot of secular Western academic discourses. So I started really to explore much more of that. And I also have had the privilege to work for the Swedish government, Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA. And also there I kind of experienced the importance of working holistically. Even if you're not a faith actor, even in a sort of a bilateral, agency to agency, to departments of education, in governments collaborating. But still the question comes, which are the core values that the education curriculum will build on? Is there a state religion? Is it a secular state ideology? Who decides on values? Are there parallel laws in society, normative religious family laws, while there's also secular constitution? What will then be overriding in policy making? And so even if you work in development cooperation or humanitarian aid and you represent a secular agent, still all these deeper dimensions are there to tackle. And so for me, it was really when I came out and I met the real world after I got my master's. That's when I really saw the value of faith dimensions, holistic approaches to work, but also actually theology. If you look at artificial intelligence today, we're kind of reflecting on which of our jobs can we just give over to AI? What can be handled by our co-pilots? I have my co-pilot, and I have given a lot of work to my co-pilot, to write up chronicles, summaries, documents for me. And when you start to see, okay, but what will not really be taken care of by the artificial intelligence, you find the first academic subjects that were there in the faculties at the beginning. It was actually the humanities, arts, ethics, theology, and nature, pure science, mathematics. And this is not what we are coming to. We really need to think how to program AI in terms of moral discourses. So I also see theology as an academic topic being revitalized. And I'm in conversation with many programmers that works in the AI space, and they value me as a theologian. And they see a limitation with some political scientists who cannot go deeper into moral discourses.
This is really interesting, and I would like, you also were alluding to the inner development goals. I would like to go there a little bit later in our conversation. If you can go back to where you work now, why should people know about what your organization is doing, and why it's important?
Yeah. So why LM International as a Swedish global foundation is doing such important work today is because we are challenging status quo. Mm-hmm. We are saying with our global strategy, Roadmap 2030, that we have failed to achieve the SDGs. We have failed to achieve the 2030 agenda. Mm-hmm. It's only few years left, and we are yet to be on top of any of the actual indicators. And we can't just blame the finances and say we're lacking the development financing for the SDGs. We have to ask ourselves the fundamental questions: are we doing things right? And the truth is, we have built in enormous aid dependency, focusing a lot on finance rather than the social or trust capital that lies in relationship building. So we are working a lot today with international aid on transactions, contribution management. And what we do in LM is we are challenging this whole paradigm. And we are saying we have to really mobilize, innovate, and transform. We have to work in new ways. We have to give the young generation more space. We have to utilize digital transformation. We have to drive green transformation. We cannot just continue to really be critical and say, where should we invest our time and capital and focus? And that has to be on transformation, building local resilient leadership. So that is what we focus on. In most communities, we're often talking about moral duty bearers, faith leaders or cultural leaders. But in some communities or countries, it's also about public sector, local government leaders. We're not limiting our work to empower moral duty bearers, but it's broader. But we are focusing on the root system of communities. So if there is a floods, if there is drought, if there is a cholera outbreak, how can a solid local resilient leadership have what it takes to live through protracted crisis and fragile, situations? So that is what makes us quite unique today. And we are, as civil society foundations, in many platforms with companies, startups, academia, and people are asking us, why are you there? You should go to the NGO club. And we are challenging the whole thinking around where NGOs sits with NGOs. We need to break these silos. We need to come out of our bubbles, and we need to form consortia and platforms where we have private sector, public sector, faith sector, academia, and the rest of civil society together.
When I was listening carefully to you, 3 questions came up. Anyway, I don't know if you'll ask them all, but let me start with one, and that is, can you come up with an example of what you just explained to us in a success story or a failure, so to make it a little bit tangible for our listeners?
Yes, definitely. I will take an example from Eastern Africa, Tanzania, where we are working to make the educational sector inclusive for children with disabilities. And there we have a Swedish company called Beyond Intent, and they have been innovating a product called Binogi, which is basically a digitalized learning platform, and it's AI driven, so you can actually connect it to any curriculum from a Ministry of Education and a local language. And from that, you can actually shift learning from school buildings to the home space or to digital learning centers. So we have a joint program with Binogi as a company from Sweden. And in this, we also have the Ministry of Education in Tanzania. And we are using public inclusive schools as test beds. Because we don't just want to work with the private schools that sometimes gets more resources. We want to really also see the public educational sector thrive in Tanzania. And we also have faith actors who are educational stakeholders in Tanzania. And we also have the parents who might be a bit hesitant to give an iPad to their child. And in this collaboration where we have all the sectors, including academia, doing research on the effects of digital learning for inclusive education, we have seen tremendous effect what this does to a child. Because first of all, a child that has been locked in the home can suddenly explore the whole world. Because to be literate and to even have an lower secondary school degree is what opens the world to you. So we are opening the world to these kids, but we are also giving them dignity, because when they get digitally literate, it means they can also start to learn how to use iPads or iPhones or smartphones, so they can also maybe in the future run a business from their phone. So it gives the dignity. It also gives a social status to families where they have kids with disabilities. So from them living in the margins and being looked down on, suddenly they are being key drivers of digital transformation in their communities. And people come to these parents for advice, So it's really turning things upside down and flipping the coin and giving these families and these children a possibility to own their development and their journey for change. And we could have done this project more NGO style, as a foundation, not having a company, an innovator, a university, or the government. But then what I feel is that this would have become very aid dependent. So once the LM project would have ended, none of these kind of learning advancement would have continued. But now it's getting integrated with the Ministry of the Ministry of Education. It's getting integrated with the Ministry of Education. And it also is an opportunity for us in Sweden to raise solidarity, to see how Swedish export and Swedish innovations can contribute to the closing gap for the SDGs. So at the same time as we are improving the indicators for SDG in Tanzania, we are also improving the contribution to the SDGs in Sweden, where also many of our private donors lives. But maybe I can add on, in our foundation, we also see that the faith sector is sometimes the fifth element, because traditionally many faith actors, churches or mosques or faith movements or faith-based, especially faith-based organizations, have been placed in secular civil society domain because they are perceived as non-profit and non-public. But the truth is that many faith actors are actually also for-profit, not only non-profit. Because if you look at offering and ties, the possibility to mobilize your own resources outside institutional funding, many faith actors are operating with the same logic as many private for-profit actors. And that's why sometimes in our foundation we place faith actors and the faith sectors as a kind of in the middle, as a fifth element, because sometimes religion is politicized and it becomes public, and then it almost function as public sector with, for example, when we have religious legislation and laws in the constitution. And so for that reason, our foundation, on your question, how we differ, what's unique, why our work is important, is because we bring other actors out of their comfort zone into co-creation. And it's not only co-creation between the actors groups or sectors, it's also breaking humanitarian aid, peace building, and development cooperation. So we are also co-creating in the triple nexus for that.
I mentioned earlier that, after I listened to you, 3 questions came to mind. The second question that I had is, because I heard you talk about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and then you also made a remark in terms of very often we put too much emphasis on, financial aid and progress. If I ask you to come up with your definition or from the organization what sustainability is, could you come up with a definition or, describe what you're getting at?
Yes, for me, sustainability is to have a circular future vision that will enable the coming generations to thrive. And this goes both for social domain and for the environmental domain and for the economic domain. And in my thinking and also in the work of our foundation, we have placed ourselves between, on one hand, the planetary boundaries. It's a concept, academic concept developed by Rockström from the Stockholm Environmental Institute. And the planetary boundaries set the regulations for what kind of expansion that is possible on our planet for biosphere and climate change, and in order for us to access fresh water and protect our biodiversity, etc. So for me, sustainability is really relating to the planetary boundaries. But on the other hand, you also have social boundaries. And for us, the whole thinking around donut economy and looking at, for example, if people cannot have social protection, like in health insurance, it doesn't matter how we improve our health services if people still are standing uninsured. So there's lots of social boundaries where we have to bring people into social protection, and protecting people socially in that is a bit systemic in the same way as we must protect our biodiversity. So I think the concept of protection is very key to sustainability. And then it's also about envisioning something that go beyond what's comprehensive in a materialistic way. And that's why we need art and faith to create these future visions for how we can restore our planet, how we can restore human relationships. And this is where the young generation, this is where they must thrive to build these future visions that are not limited to the logics of today's system.
Okay, I have the feeling that we You and I can have a conversation about Plato and how he looked at the world. We won't go there today. You know, we met a week ago, and what I did learn, you know, that you're enormously driven and you know you barely sleep. I'm going to ask you a question about sleeping anyway. You know, why do you get out of bed in the morning?
Yeah, wow. Yeah, for me, it's about really adding contribution and value. I've seen effects of my work over years and what it has meant for people and communities. And tracking change over time is what really motivates me to wake up. I know if I engage in this conversation, one more conversation, I will contribute to a better world. And that's why I believe for us, we must give room to conversations. So often when I wake up in the morning, after I've left, you know, my kids and the family and everything, I give room for insightful conversations. So I'm a mentor. I have my mentees across the globe in many different continents and countries, and I call them on WhatsApp and I ask them to give me insightful input, and that will really influence my day. It will make me, you know, able to challenge the current paradigm. I mean, so what really makes me go in the morning is to know that there are so many young leaders out there and they need an encouragement for me, and that can make all the difference for them. But also, I'm waking up thinking I will learn something new today.
Great. Josephine, you know that this podcast is a spin-off of 100 Mile Walk that I have been doing since 2012 to raise awareness and funds on, you know, for ending hunger, poverty, and injustice. This, you know, but when I walk, you know, and that's 15 to 20 miles a day in a week or 5 or 6 days. Yeah, I talk. I'm sometimes accompanied by, you know, guests, fellow walkers, and we talk about life. And then very often we start talking about spirituality. And around spirituality, you know, because, you know, why, for God's sake, are you walking 15 miles or 20 miles? What I'm fascinated with is when we start talking about the younger generation and spirituality. So one of the questions that I've been asking my guests is, what do you see happening among youth? And especially I'm interested because you work so much with younger generation and how they look at spirituality or how they perceive that and experience that. And I'm asking especially because, especially in the West, there seems to be a tendency that, you know, younger generation maybe doesn't go to church anymore. That's different than the older generation, although maybe that happened already since the 60s and 70s. So what do you see happening with around youth and spirituality?
Wow. I see lots of longing for spiritual growth in leadership. Most young leaders I work with, they give room for spirituality in their weekly routines. Maybe meditation, yoga, prayer, reflection. Many of them also practice retreats where they are just quiet, and they try to find that inner voice in them who can guide them. And when I look at my generation, there is more of, you know, rebellious thinking that people have grown up in a secularized Sweden, and you want to really proclaim your own values, your own. Now in late modern societies like Sweden, they are rather searching for that inner voice, but also fellowship, community. So in our foundation, when we address faith or Christian values in job interviews. You know, you would first think that when you sit in an office in Sweden, someone would go, I don't want to have anything to do with Christianity or faith. I'm a secular, professionalized Swede. And that's what you can hear from someone born in the 1970s. But when you talk to someone who is today 25 years old, they would go, that's important in my life. I like that. I want to grow spiritually strong. I want to be in a workplace where the employer acknowledge a spiritual reality. That's the kind of feedback we're getting in our interviewing from an HR perspective.
Yeah.
It's very different feedback when we ask about our Christian values and how they relate to that. It's completely different responses.
So that's really interesting. So I have two questions around it what come to my mind. One is, so do they then go to church, or no, they're interested more in the values of it? And then the second question is your organization open to non-Christian,
Yes, so we are open to all sorts of people. If I look at, for example, our country office in Sudan, majority of our staff are Muslims, for example. Like we're talking around 80 employees in that particular office. And if I look at our office in Sweden, we have people on a very broad spectrum of faith background. So in our foundation, we are open to anyone. But for us, our Christian values are grounded on principles. How we do our work and how we also do leadership.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to accelerate our conversation a bit. Not rapid fire yet, but I would like to touch upon a couple of things with you quickly that I try to discuss always with my guests. Music is very important to me. So I always ask a question about music as well. So my question to you is, if I ask you to come up with a piece of music or a song that best embodies what you are about for a big part, what piece of music or song would that be, and why?
Wow. Probably for me it would be instrumental music, because I have many artists that inspires me. I don't know how many times I've been listening to the sound bites of someone like Lauryn Hill and how she goes reverse, go back, rethink. But when it comes to actually my life journey, and if I have to find, for me then the music I relate to is more instrumental music, classic music, where I kind of feel that I want to find this kind of harmony. And if you look at many of the symphonies and the classic ones is what I love. And if you go like Mozart or any of them, you find that the instruments are in harmony. And this is really what I try to accomplish in my leadership, is to see how can each person thrive. So often we all are running for the ball instead of becoming teammates and seeing that we have our thriving place. And what we need if we want to achieve, the SDGs and eradicate hunger and achieve sustainable peace, it's for each of us to actually play our parts better, more in harmony. And I think music can give us vision. So especially for my efforts for sustainable peace, the classical symphonies would best describe.
But I'm going to push you to come
Okay.
up with the title, because and
Okay,
and I'm pushing you.
Wonderful World.
Okay. Okay, because I'm just to tell you and to remind the listeners, because we have made a playlist on Spotify
Okay.
with all the songs that have been selected by our guests. So
Okay.
if people go, are a member of Spotify, and you go to #WalkTalkListen, you will find that playlist, and then we will add A Wonderful World.
With Louis
To you.
Armstrong.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Has to be the traditional.
Yeah. Josephine, what I hope with this podcast we are able to achieve is to really connect people, and especially by showing that, maybe initially when you think about, hey, this guest on the podcast, I probably have nothing in common with this person. The person is a musician, or this person is working in the NGO world, or in the church. But when they listen, they realize, oh, there is stuff, and which is interesting. So I hope that this really helps to connect and to improves people's understanding of each other, especially in this more polarizing world. So one little method I made is, I'm looking for it here now, is question from a previous guest for you.
What are your means to understand if you're in a conflict or conflicting interests? What are your means to soften your mind towards the other person?
It's a great question. And my first answer would be, I have a little bit of temper. When I'm in a sort of a debate on something, I often first like logic argumentation. Probably it's because I have this researcher background.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to prove my case. But then often when I leave the place is when I start to reflect. Many would tell me it's a little bit too late. But that's how it goes for me. I kind of need to verbalize my thinking in a sort of a give and take debate. And often it's actually walking. It fits your podcast. It's often when I'm walking out of an office, out of a building, and I realized I spoke too much and listened too little. That's probably the most common things I reflect on, and where I really have to repent on a daily basis and say, I need to improve as a leader here. So how to ease in my mind is probably to have the courage to come back. And sometimes I have that courage. So I take up the phone and I go, I left your office earlier this morning. When I walk out of your office, I realized that you were right on some of your inputs. And I want to just reach out to you and say, thank you. That was insightful. Even if I may not admit, I've changed all my views, my opinion, they might still stand. But I want often to acknowledge that the conversation helped me to gain deeper understanding and insight. So that is probably the method I use, but it's unfortunately a little bit more on the to repent side, after. So where I'm trying to mature, and maybe even to your listeners, is to say, when we're in the midst of the heated talk, can we dare to just stop it and stay quiet for a while? Or maybe to stop talking and start listening and realizing we can even get this humility when we're in the midst of the conversation. And I think that's what's missing, for example, in many peace talks. It's too heated. So it's only afterwards that you bring in other people, after the politicians that have to clean up in the peace talks. And what if public leaders could, in the midst of the heated conversations, dare to just acknowledge the other voice? But that's my approach.
Trying to listen and take it. And no, thanks, Josephine. I my listeners know that I've shared with them that when I started this podcast 2 years ago, or maybe longer now, more than 200 episodes ago, I spent like 3.5 hours on editing, realizing that I had not listened carefully to my guests because I was so busy with, thinking about, this is the answer or this is the next question. And I think many of us have that. So it's not easy. First is the realization, and then second, as you mentioned, is really doing something about it. And they're separate things but related. Your question for the next guest.
Yeah, my question is on how can we best build trust in a world system that is built on control.
Okay. I would like to go back to the Sustainable Development Goals. It's a topic that I really, try to lift up because I think it's important. I always say, the Sustainable Development Goals 17, they are not perfect. Probably there are too many. We are now, I think in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we kind of will be looking at them again, during this Summit for the Future. But I one of the things is I think that not enough people know about them. And so the first thing in trying to reach them is, making people aware of it. Anyway, my question to you is, what do you want to know? What do you want my listeners or our listeners to know about the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah, 3 things. First is that if you want to achieve greater systemic impact, you must move together. As different nation states, as regional entities like the European Union or African Union, as private sector investors, governments, faith sector, civil society sector, academia, as different societal domains like public health and social development, etc. So if we want systemic transformation, we cannot just work on our sides. We must come together. And that is actually, for me, the basis of the SDGs, is to see how we bring it all together and we can have it all approved, affirmed together in the context of multilateral cooperation in the United Nations. The second thing that everyone should know and relate to in the SDG frameworks is that it's not anymore us and them. So if you look at the 8 Millennium Development Goals that were before as a framework, it was about looking at, so where are the areas geographically where societies should develop? And in the north, what would be complementary role? Would it be to bring financing or exporting technology or solutions? Today we know that we are interconnected, not least through our global public goods. So we know that we have seen it many times through the pandemic, how we're all interconnected. We have seen it, of course, clearly with climate change. We have seen it in the area of peace. When Ukraine got into a war with Russia, immediately there was a consequence of food sovereignty in countries like Kenya or Uganda. So we're all interconnected, and the SDG framework stipulates that you cannot isolate us and them, the rich and the poor world, or developing and undeveloped countries. Today, we only live in one world, we have one planet, one humanity, and this is so beautifully expressed, not only through the SDG framework, but also the 2030 agenda. And often, when I meet emerging young leaders, I actually put more focus on the 2030 agenda. Because the goals is about our to-do list. Mm-hmm. We're going to go out there and fix this world. But the 2030 agenda is the kind of joint transformational vision. So that is a document that many miss out on because they get so instrumental. They want to get to work. They are too eager. So they skip the overarching visionary framework, which is the 2030 agenda. And then the third thing. So the first is basically to see if we want to have greater impact, we must all come together. And second is to see really, the 2030 agenda as a transformational vision where we deal with this fragmentation we have in the world between global north and global south. And all of that is addressed in the 2030 agenda. The third thing links to inner development goals. And that is to say that, for example, health is not just health infrastructure. It's about determinants to health. If you are illiterate, you cannot access health information. So then you cannot buy a malaria net or deliver safely with a midwife. So for health to thrive, you need clean water, you need education. So what we also see with the SDG framework is that we have to start reconceptualizing many words that we are using in our everyday vocabulary. So before the SDG framework, people often said health and meant technically hospitals, doctors, nurses, medicine, not incorporating concepts like fresh water, clean water, ability to read and write as part of comprehensive health, One Health. So through the SDG framework, many words have actually been redefined. And also, as a researcher, I find that fascinating. There is such richness in how many concepts have been redefined.
Can you, because you mentioned inner development goals and the framework before, can you maybe explain, why you think it's important, and especially in relation to the SDGs? And when I listen to you, you're saying, something like, the sustainable development goals are looking at processes and systems that we need to change, but you can't do that without the work at the community, at the collective level, and at the individual level. And there is where the inner development goals framework comes in. Is that correct, or?
Yes, we haven't achieved the SDGs, and it's because we're lacking investment in leadership. And in order to build leaders, that's very different from managers. Managers need systems, routines, policies, guidance. Leaders, they need to get to know themselves, what drives them on the inside, what really also will be the base for their decision making. And the inner development framework is really a framework to build leaders, to look at deeper concepts like self-love, restoration, transformation, forgiveness, all of this. And if we work on this, and if we grow as leaders, we are better equipped to implement the SDGs. So the whole idea is, instead of creating new problems or do harm, we avoid doing harm and we go to the root, and to the root both causes but also motivators. And we say, if we invest in leadership, then the resources we have for implementation on the SDGs will have greater effect. So it's shifting perspective from the outside to the inside, from activities to transformational change, from measurable quantitative results to looking at human relations in harmony with each other and with the nature. And if we look at the cost of fragility, conflict, it's huge. I've been working throughout my career in Democratic Republic of Congo. If you look at the actual cost of sexual violence, disruptions, it's enormous. And if you instead take that same amount that you get, if you calculate the costs, and you invest that in an emerging generation of young new leaders, and you build them up on the inside with the basis of the SDG inner framework, then you have really the base for transformative change. And then we can achieve the SDGs. That's why I believe still in the SDGs. I have not given up. And it's because I see hope in young people. I see a new generation saying, we must do more. We must make new type of priorities. We must take greater responsibility, especially at the moral, ethical level. So the SDG inner framework is something every company or organization should adopt. What I've done in my foundation is I take those 5 areas that exists in the framework, because this has built up by world-leading psychologists. So it's really evidence, research-based. And the psychologists have looked at what it takes, what type of inner capacities is needed for leaders to be transformational. And I let those in my foundation grade themselves on these 5.
Is that on the being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting?
So they actually grade themselves, and there is this framework.
Okay.
And then we look at their leadership journey. And then they revisit it 1 year later. And we use that to track leadership developments, but we also use it actually to enable us to work as change agents, to see where we have our loopholes and where we have our fragility in terms of innovation culture. So to really build an innovation culture in an organization or company, you need these capabilities, the 5. You need this framework, and it's really useful.
Okay. I'm going to push you a bit because I know that there are people out there who say, "Oh, Josephine, you're a dreamer," because I understand you mentioned to us in the beginning of this conversation already. We know that we are all interconnected. Do we really know that we are all interconnected? And are we willing to really work on the basis that we are all interconnected? Because if you look what is happening around the world, it seems that people are becoming more tribal and looking more inward, and also vote as such. Well, am I missing something?
Yeah, I think it's actually the public goods that will save us, save humanity. Because in order to access fresh water or the resources we need to sustain our lives, we will have to collaborate better and closer between nations, between global south and north, across faith traditions, cultures, different norms. And if you look at the World Values Survey and the clashes on values, it's enormous between continents and countries and groups. So, of course, I acknowledge the reality you are portraying. But what I also believe with interconnectivity is that if you have the possibility to experience interconnection with others, you very seldom take a step back. So if we bring people into community, into self-awareness, because being able to connect with others always start with you, being able to love yourself, etc. So if we work on ourselves, if we are inviting people in to community fellowship, I'm convinced that people will not take a step back. But today there are so many who are facing loneliness, depression, mental illness. And with that reality, fragmentation and otherness will grow. So we have to fight that. And in order to fight that, the weapon we have in our hands is really to invest in young leaders, because they can also multiply. And that's why I also have my hope that digital transformation can be used for disruption. Many parents think video gaming is destroying their kids. My own son is a gamer, But I believe that if we use it in a vital, dynamic way, we can be more connected today than we ever been. And if we use digital transformation to bring people together, anyone can be invited into a conversation, even if you sit alone in your home. So I have hope that community building will take place, but I think it's going to be hard work. It's going to be vital work. And today, as many leaders I see in the NGO sector are not ready to step up. We're too comfortable. We look at our own networks and establishment, but we have to start looking at those who are not yet into fellowship, into community, into interconnection. And when we bring them in, they're not going to take a step back.
These conversations always go fast. I have 3 or 4 rapid fire questions for you. So my request to you is to, maximum 1 tweet answer, because I really would like to go through it very fast. Any message, invitation, or question for the listeners?
Yes. One is, how is your inner life? And how your inner life resonates with your career ambition. That is really something to reflect upon today.
Okay. Second question. Do you believe in the potential of one simple act of kindness, that it can create a ripple effect?
Yes, I believe that. And the founder of my foundation, LM International, Harry Lindqvist, he started the Friendly Week with this ambition. And now it has gone huge as something we do on an annual basis. And it's really because we believe one kind action will have this effects.
So if I ask you to come up with one simple act of kindness right now to do, this week or in the coming days, what would you do?
I would probably carry something for someone. I try to do that often. And it's also with a metaphor of easing, burdens. We all have them on inside and outside. But on outside, it becomes for me very tangible. I'm all the time traveling on boats, trains, buses, bicycle, cars, flights. And I'm surrounded by people who are in a hurry and carrying lots of bags. And sometimes I have too much luggage myself. But the times when I'm traveling light, I have the tendency to take on people's luggage if I am on the way to a flight gate or a bus station. And I love that because it's an easy act of kindness, but it also gives me physical exercise. And that's the whole point. Being kind will make you also feel good. It will also give something back to you.
Might it even be more effective for yourself than for the other?
Yes, it's like I'm saving money from buying a gym card. I will actually feel good as a person. So probably at the end of the day, it might give me more than for the other person. But I also believe in the intergenerational aspect. You know, I think I'm not too young, but still I'm not part of the oldest segment of society. And I really think this whole idea of paying respect for an older generation that has gone before us, I think we should continue to honor those who are older than us. And whenever we get the opportunity to give back encouragement, cookies, just to bring a book to someone who has been your mentor or inspirational role model, that's something so easy and tangible. But for that person who has walked with you, it will mean everything to see you shifting focus from yourself to someone else.
I asked you many questions. Any question that I did not ask you, but I should have asked you?
Yeah, I think you should have asked me why I'm in New York today. It's exciting to be here. We are starting up our new New York office. We have previously in my foundation have had an office in Miami and Chicago. Now we are merging them into a new New York office. And it's because we want to bring community-centered approaches, voices from the states in different parts of Sudan or Somalia or Yemen. We want to bring and amplify these voices straight on Manhattan. And we want the voices to be authentic. They may contain faith messages or culture messages or political messages, but we want authentic, powerful voices from communities to be heard here today. And this should be amplified in the midst of policymaking, in the midst of top-down approaches. We should have this counter movement of bottom-up approaches on Manhattan.
Okay. So if people want to know more about your organization, where should they go?
They should go www.lminternational.org. Okay. If you go to our global website, you can get all the contacts for our Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, social media. You can get connected to our teams on the ground across the world. You can see our approaches, how we work in quadruple helix, cross-sectoral, triple nexus, linking, breaking silos. So that's what you should do today. Visit our website.
Okay. Thank you so much for your willingness to talk with me today and to share, so many things. I really appreciate it. Good luck.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me in and to raise my voice. That is something that I never take for granted. So I feel very honored, and I also feel honored to share a piece of my life to all of you as listeners. And I hope to listen back one day when I bump into you somewhere in the world.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.